Okay, so in this series, I'm going to cover React. So React is a JavaScript library, and it's one of the three currently most popular libraries. There is React, there is Angular, there is Vue.js, and these are used a lot in front-end web development. Now, the reason I cover React is that I personally prefer React over the other ones. Now, I know people who use Vue.js, they love it. I like it too, but for some reason, React makes more sense to me when I actually use it because it's a lot more like writing JavaScript code. And then the second reason I'm doing this in React is because you are more likely to find jobs in React than you would currently in Vue.js or Angular. Now, I'm going to build React application using parcel.js to compile all the React files. React has its own tools to do this. I'm going to be using parcel.js for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is for training. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just go to this empty folder that I've just opened in VS Code. I'm going to open the terminal. And I'm going to start by creating a node project. So I'll just do npm init -y. And -y just to answer yes to all questions. If you do -y and you get any errors, don't use the -y part and do answer all the questions and you'll be fine. But for me, I'm just going to do this. That will create our package.json file to get started with our node project. Now, the second thing I'm going to do, I'm going to install Parcel version 2 as a local installation and as a dev dependency. So to do that, this is the command they tell you to run. Now, I'm not going to do that. I want you to have a particular version that I'm using just in case you want to follow and get the exact same thing. So what I'll do, let's very quickly check what's the current more or less stable version of version 2 that we can install. So I'll go back to my terminal. Let's just do clear to get this out of the way so it's not confusing. So I'm going to go to my terminal here and I'm going to do npm view parcel and I'll do versions. So what this should allow me to do is to see what versions of parcel we have that we can install. So see, this is what I got. Let me actually make this bigger. So the one that I don't want all of this nightly stuff. So I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to find the latest beta version. See this one. Now, if you're doing this, feel free to try newer versions if you want. But if you want to get exactly what I have, you can install the same exact version. And the way you would do that, I'm going to take this and I'm just going to do npm install -d, and that should be just dev dependency. And the reason that we need this as a dev dependency is because we only need this while we're doing the development. Once we ship the product itself doesn't need parcel. Then I'm going to type parcel, and then we're going to do the @ the email sign, and follow it by the version we want to install. I'll just paste it, but you could just type this exact same version after this @ and you should get the same version installed. And again, if for whatever reason you get some sort of errors when you try to do this, just do that view command that I just did and see what's the latest non-nightly version that you can actually get and install that one. So I'm going to hit enter and I'll get back when this is done. Now, if you get some of these warnings like this, that is okay. So long as you don't get any errors, you should be in a good shape. If you do get some errors, then try to install it as an administrator. So if you're on Windows, run your terminal as admin and try that. If you're on a Mac or Linux, just do that same command I just did. Let me just clear this. And just start with sudo in the beginning to run it as an admin. That should take care of that. But for me, that was installed just fine. Nothing else to do here. So now that we have Parcel version 2 installed, the other thing I'm going to do, because this is a local parcel dependency, I'm going to modify my package.json file. I'm going to go in here. And here we need to create a script to run that local parcel installation that I just did. Now, for that, we're going to do basically, instead of this test, I'll do something like start. And then we'll do the command here. So we'll do parcel and then serve and then the file that we're trying to serve. I'll just type this and I'll explain you what that means in just a second. So I'm going to do dot, then slash, then main HTML. Now this refers to what file it's going to use, parcel is going to use as the main entrance. Now if you need to understand more about parcel, I have more videos about parcel, but here it's just parcel serve. That's the new version. This is the way we actually do this. And we have the main entry point, which is our main HTML file. Now we don't have that file here yet, so I'm going to go ahead and create that. So I'm going to click on this plus sign and do main.html. So now this would be that main HTML file that I'm referring to over here. And this dot is basically current directory. So basically I'm saying in the current folder over here, we are trying to find this file main.html, which is right here. So with this, I'm going to save this file. And what this is going to allow me to do is to simply just type npm start, and that will automatically run this command. And as you can see, it created this local host for us to be able to actually view this project. Now, if I copy this link, paste it in my browser, or do command or control click, it will open that page in a browser. And as you can see, there's nothing in this page. And there's nothing in it because, well, there's nothing in this HTML file. Now, let's just put something in here. So I'm going to do exclamation, hit tab. And then in the body, let's just create a div with an ID app. And for now, in this div with an ID app, I'm just going to put an h1 just for us to verify that this works. So if I save this, go back and take a look. So that actually loads that page. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to create a JavaScript file here. I'm going to call it main.js. And then I'm going to link to this file from this main HTML file. So I'll just go down here and do a script and just link to that main.js file right here in the current directory. We have this main.js file. So if I save this, now this JavaScript file should be linked to this. So I'm going to remove this h1 that says this works for now. Now the idea behind React is that you don't really write your HTML here in your HTML file like you would do in a regular HTML project. All we do usually in a React project, we simply just do one div with certain ID, and basically everything else on this page will be created using JavaScript. So we don't actually put any existing HTML in here. This is pretty much going to be all we do in our HTML file, and all the rest of this file will be created in JavaScript code. Now, a lot of people who start with React, they don't get the concept of importing and exporting modules. And that's why I'm going to start with that, because that's going to be crucial to be able to actually work with React. Now to do that, let's just start by going to this main JavaScript file right in here. And let's just create some things. Now, just remember, all I have here is this div with an ID app. Let's just store a reference to that. So I'm just going to do document get element by ID, and the ID for that is app. And we'll just store a reference for this. I'll just call it app as a variable. Now here, let's create our own element. So let's create that h1. And the element we'll be creating is h1 element. So again, I'll save this in a variable. So this will be that element, h1. Now in that h1, we want that text. So we'll do text content, and we'll make it equal, this is JavaScript. And then finally, we need to put this inside of this app that's currently already on the page. So we'll just take that app, and do append child and just append that ELH1 to this. So I'm going to save this. So at this point, if all of this works the way it should, if we go back and open the page, see, it renders this is JavaScript. So if we just take a look at our HTML that was generated here, if I right click and inspect, see over here, we got this div with an ID app. Then inside of it, we have an H1 that says this is JavaScript. But again, all of that was created with JavaScript because this is pretty much what we got in our HTML. So now let's say we want to add some sort of ID to this H1 element or some sort of class to this H1 element. So the way we would do that in plain JavaScript, again, I can go in here and take that same ELH1, that reference to that element, and then make the ID attribute of this equal title. And then we could do something like that for the class. So we'll do the class name and we'll make it red. Doesn't really matter. It's not going to do anything, but we'll make it anyways. So if I save it and go back and take a look, see, if you look here, now it's not going to do anything here, but if you look in our HTML, see, we have the ID here, title, and the class is red. Now, finally, let's say we want to create another element and put it in this page. So I could just copy most of this and really quickly just paste it. And let's say this time I'm going to create a paragraph element. That will be the text content, and we'll refer to that P element right from here. I'm going to get rid of IDs and classes for that. And finally, if we wanted to add that to our main div again, we would basically just do another app.append child and add that paragraph to this. And if I save this, go back and take a look, we should be able to see now we have the H1, we have the paragraph inside of that ID app. So as you start creating all of this code, the code gets larger and larger, and you probably just want to take some parts of your code and put it in a separate file. So for us to do that, we're going to create another JavaScript file right here in the same folder in this case. And I'm going to call that headers.js. So this is my other JavaScript file. So what I'll do, I'll just grab this part where I'm doing this header, cut it out of here, and put it in this file. Now I want to be able to take this H1 that we're creating here, where we add this text content, the title, and the class name, and all this stuff, and be able to import it here in this file and use it over here. Because at this point, this it's not going to know what it is. So if I just save this currently and try to load this, see, that didn't work. And if I go to my console, you'll see I get an error and it says ELH1 is not defined. So I get a JavaScript error that says, I have no clue what this is. So what we're going to need to do, we need to import it from here. And to be able to import it from here, we have to tell what exactly are we exporting from here. And the way we do that, we go below this and we say export default. And I'll explain you why default exactly. But for now, we'll just go with that ELH1. So I'll just take that variable and I'll export it from this file. Now, once we have this export line, we should be able to go to our main JavaScript file and import it. And we have to import on top here. So we're going to do import ELH1, and this is case sensitive, from, and in quotes, you basically pass the path to the file. So in this case, that other file, headers.js, is in the current directory. So I'll do dot and this, and then we'll do headers. I don't think we need to do the .js part. If you do it, it doesn't hurt. So I'm going to try both ways. I'm going to do .js. We're going to hit save. So now let's go check what happened. See, now I am importing this ELH1. That should be this export from here. And at that point, that should be available in here to use. So let's save this and go back and take a look. So as you can see, this works again. We don't get the error we used to. And our file is built and everything works just fine. Now, one other thing I'm going to mention here is that, actually before that, let me just try this without the .js and make sure it works too. See, it works just fine. So if you want to skip that JavaScript extension, you can. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that you can actually rename what that variable is called when you're exporting it. So here, see, we said export default this. What we could do instead, we could say export default, for example, h1 equals that. Basically, we're saying export it as h1. That's the name we're exporting out of here. That should be whatever this variable content is. That's coming from here. Now, at this point, if I save this and go back, now we should be able to just import h1 from here, from headers, and then append h1 as a child. And if I save this, this should still work. So see, as I go back, we still have our page. It still says this is JavaScript and this is our paragraph. And this is where I'm going to talk about the default part. So if you remember, I said I'll explain why this is default. Now, when you're doing exports, you can actually have other exports other than this main export. So this is what we call the default export. And the way you import that default export is the way I just did show you here. But you can actually export more than one thing from your file. So I could go back in here and let's just export something else. So let's say we create a constant here and we're going to make this constant, I'll just make it some sort of text. So now I should be able to just go in here and export this constant. So by adding this word export in front of this declaration for this constant, I'll be able to export this variable my text out of this file. Now, to be able to import this my text in here, we go here and I add a comma, and because it's not the default export, I cannot do my text the way I did before. The way I need to do that, I need to put this in brackets like this. So everything that's not a default export, we need to export it this way. So I'm just going to take that variable, for example, and put it as this paragraph content. And if we save this, go back and take a look. See, it says my super text. So now I was able to export this variable too. Now you could also export more things by basically just doing the same thing. So I can create another variable of some type and then just add export and then import that as well. Let's just do an example of that. So we'll do export. We'll create another constant and do my text too. And we'll say another text. And now if I wanted to also import this one, I'm going to save this first, go back here and just simply just do a comma and then do that next one, my text too. So we can keep comma separating this. And then we should be able to use that my text too now. So I'll just do some concatenation here. And we should be able to see that as a part of that paragraph right there. So you can also export functions. So for example, instead of doing this like this, where I'm creating this variable, we could actually create a function here. And then I'm going to simply just grab this code, put it right in here. And then what I'll do, I'll have this function simply return this, that heading 1. So now we'll have this function inside of this file, and we could export that function by simply doing export default, and I'll just simply just say header, which is the name of that function right here. So now if I wanted to import that function, I would go here, and instead of h1 here, this is now called header. This is our default export, if you remember. So the way we import it is like this, unlike these that are not our default exports. So now we have this function header. So if I wanted to create that h1, see, I'm using that h1 here. Now, if I do just header here, this is not going to work because this is a function. So to be able to get the content of that function, we need to execute the function. So we need to do this set of parentheses because this is a function. We're going to run the function, get the returned result. and then put this inside of this. So if I save this, that should produce, again, as you can see, the same results. It just works fine. So if I didn't execute this and save this, see, it does not work. And if I go under console, see, it says argument 1 does not implement whatever. Basically, whatever we get, it's not the type of variable it expects. So again, to make this work, we're going to run the function. Now, you could store it in a variable in a separate line and then pass to this. So you could say const h1 equals the result of that function. And then we could do h1 here. Again, same thing. And this should work too. Just like that. So that shows you how we can do exports. We can export functions. We can export variables, just regular variables. We can export JavaScript objects. You can pretty much export anything you want. Now, for these functions, you can also pass arguments. For example, let's say this argument here, we'll just call it in text. And then we'll use that right here to basically have it as the text for the header. And then I can go here, and then I can just use that argument. So right now, see, we have this header. This is the function. Now it's going to accept the arguments. So we can just pass first header as the text. If I save this, if I go back, see, we get that first header. We pass an argument to that function. We can reuse that same function multiple times. So I'm just going to copy paste this. And I'm just going to directly put the function in here and say second header. So we can pass that over here. So if I save this, now we should be able to reuse that function all over again to put that on our page. See, we got 2 headers and 1 paragraph. One thing that's probably going to also be important to know is that you can also rename these variables right in here. There are going to be times that it's going to be necessary because you can create some sort of conflict. So if you already have a variable that's called header on your page that you declared, you probably don't want this to be also called header because that will create a conflict. Or the same way, see, we have this my text over here. So if we have this my text over here that we're exporting from this particular file, and then we have, let's say, another variable here that we call my text. And then I use that, let's say, as this text for this header. See, I get an error here because now we have this conflict. We are importing this my text variable, but we are creating this internal my text variable too. So to be able to use this, we can rename this my text variable. We can say my text as and give it a different name. And then I should be able to just use that here instead of using my text. And this my text would still refer to this. So let's save this and try to take a look. And as you can see, this is my text in this file, and this is the rest of it, so it works just fine. And then the same way, you can break your code in multiple files, and you'll see React doing this a lot. So I could create another JavaScript file here. And then for that, let's say we want to just export some sort of paragraph and use it. So we'll just take this, go to this file, paste it here, and then we can just simply export default P, which is that paragraph. Now in this paragraph, it has no clue what empty or my text2 actually mean in this particular file. So we need to create those. And here, the way we actually get those, see this empty, that was this import from that other file. And my text2 was also import from that other file. So what I could do, I could just get rid of these 2 imports from here because we don't really use them. And then we can go to our other file and we can import them from that headers file. And remember, those are not default imports, so we have to put them in those brackets. So I'm going to say import that my text as empty and my text too. And now it should be able to know what this is and what this is, and we'll export this P out of this. So at this point, now we can go to our main and import now this paragraph. So we're gonna do import, and I called it P from this file. And then at this point, it should know what this P means, so we can just use it over here. So if I save this, I should be able to see my page still works just fine. But now I have it all over the place when we have different imports from different places. Now in this main file, we import from 2 different files. Then in this secondary file, we import from that headers file, and so on. So the main thing here I want you to pay attention to is that very often when you work with React, you'll see that all these files are basically named with the same name as the variable that you're exporting. But remember that it's not the file name. It's just whatever you call this variable in your export. That's what matters.